Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary and a contender for the Deputy Leadership of the Labour Party, joins me now in the studio. Lovely to see you in the flesh. I know you've got a very important announcement about anti-Semitism in schools and universities. Before we get on to that, can I just ask you about this spying scandal, because it's all over the front pages of the Sunday papers once again. The government said no ministers were involved in deciding evidence in the case, but did Keir Starmer or any other ministers know what was going on before the case collapsed? Because if they didn't, it just suggests that Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, is doing what he wants without any oversight by the Prime Minister.
So these are decisions and matters for the Crown Prosecution Service, who take decisions about whether or not to proceed with the prosecution. It's worth just pointing out that because this took place back in 2023, it was on the basis of the legislation in force then. We now have the National Security Act, so the law has moved on in order to allow for prosecutions. But this ultimately was a matter for the Crown Prosecution Service. We are very disappointed that the prosecutions didn't proceed, but that is unfortunately where we are.
But we've had various different people, including our own security services, including Simon Case, who is in charge of the civil service, saying that the government intervened in this case so that the case collapsed by not suggesting that China could be described as a threat. They carry out cyber attacks, they steal IP, they have secret police stations spying on Hong Kong dissidents, they have bounties on the heads of Hong Kong dissidents, and indeed they sanction members of parliament. In what world is China not a threat?
Well, we are clear as a government that China presents opportunities, but challenges and threats alongside that.
So it is a threat?
Yeah, there are threats and challenges that come. It's why we take a strategic approach to China. And it's why, alongside that, we are clear that this government's number one responsibility is to the national security of our country. Of course, we need to engage with China. They're a big economy. But what comes first is our national security.
So if China is a threat, then this spying trial shouldn't have been collapsed by the government not saying that it was a threat.
China presents threats and challenge, but we also believe that China presents opportunities in terms of our trading relationships with Chinese businesses.
But if China does present threats, then it is a threat. We agree on that. Therefore, the spying trial shouldn't have been collapsed.
The trial and the evidence that was connected to that predates this government, goes back to 2023 and was ultimately a matter for the Crown Prosecution Service.
I know, but the Civil Service, head of the Civil Service then, Simon Case, said it was designated as a threat. So China is a threat to Britain.
I can't speak to what Simon Case has said. All I can make clear is that we are disappointed the prosecutions didn't go ahead, but this does predate this government. It goes back some years and it was a decision taken by the Crown Prosecution Service.
Is the Chinese super embassy going to be opened in Tower Hamlets?
This is a process that's underway. It's a quasi-judicial process. I'm afraid I just can't comment on it.
And do we know if any compensation was paid to Jingye when they ran British Steel into the ground? Apparently a sum of £1 billion has been mentioned.
Again, I'm not in a position to comment on that. What I can say is that we did, of course, intervene to make sure that British Steel's future was secured at Scunthorpe.
This whole scandal reflects very badly on the government, doesn't it?
I mean, this case, as I say, goes back some years, and therefore I don't think it's quite so straightforward as that, no.
Let's move on to your brief. You have said that you want to crack down on anti-Semitism in schools and universities. What have we been witnessing and what is the government going to do about it?
We have seen a shocking rise in anti-Semitism on our campuses and in wider society, and I've spoken with many British Jews who are worried and concerned about what they see, about wanting their children to be safe on their way in their communities, but also on university campuses. That's why what I'm setting out today is the action we're taking to make sure that universities are honouring their responsibilities to provide safe and welcoming environments for all students, including Jewish students. And that will involve more funding for universities to provide training for those working in security matters, but also around student welfare on anti-Semitism so they can recognise it and tackle it. But what I've also said to university vice-chancellors is that whilst I recognise the important role of protest, and that's a democratic right in our society, there can be no place for harassment and intimidation on campus. And universities are able to step in the event that it jeopardises the safety of Jewish students.
I mean, the NASUWT, which is a teaching union, a survey found 51% of Jewish teachers had experienced anti-Semitism in their schools since May 2023. A total of 44% reported swastika graffiti appearing at their school since that time. 39% had witnessed or been subject to Nazi-related comments. Chants of Free Palestine and swear word the Jews had also been heard. How has this come to pass?
It's absolutely shocking. And, you know, no Jewish member of staff in a school should have to experience that. I mean, alongside the action we're taking on universities, we're also putting in place more funding so that secondary school students will be able to take part in education around the Holocaust, around Holocaust survivor testimony. And that will commence shortly, because whilst we've got to take firm action where anti-Semitism rears its head, and we've got to root it out, we all have to provide education to challenge much of the prejudice and the anti-Semitism that thrives in the darkness. And that's why providing education for students alongside taking action where it arises is the answer.
It was interesting yesterday. We've got the ceasefire now in place in the Middle East, which is obviously a great thing, and we look forward to the hostages being released, we hope, today and tomorrow. And yet yesterday, again, there are marches on the streets of Britain. We've got chants of From the River to the Sea. It's been reported in the Sunday Telegraph that was again said, globalise the Intifada and all the rest of it. Why are these marches now taking place when a ceasefire has already been agreed?
People feel very strongly about the conflict and about the suffering that they see, and I feel that too. But I agree that we also need to see the hostages released, and I hope and pray that within the next 24 hours they will be back home with their loved ones.
And if you're chanting that, particularly the students outside King's College London, which has got an illustrious alumni actually of Jewish students, Alain de Botton, the philosopher, Edith Morley, the suffragette, and others, if you're shouting that outside King's College London as a student, something needs to happen, doesn't it, to you? In terms of discipline.
I understand how distressing that is for Jewish people in our country to hear. And what I also said, connected to the protests that were due to take place on the 7th of October, is that just because you can protest, and the right to protest is important, it's a cornerstone of our democracy, doesn't mean you have to protest.
No.
And it doesn't mean you have to protest on a day when many Jews in this country will be grieving, especially given the recent terrorist attack we saw in Manchester. So I think it speaks to the need for all of us to reflect on our shared humanity, a sense of decency to one another, and the need to understand different points of view, rather than, you know, what we're increasingly seeing is the degree to which this is causing significant tensions more widely.
Sure. Let's move on to VAT on private schools, which you know is my little pet subject whenever we speak. So when we've been speaking about it in the studio before, you've always said, look, private schools are businesses, they absorb the costs and all the rest of it. It's an interesting story in the Sunday Telegraph, which has been gained by a Freedom of Information request, and has discovered that the Treasury expected private schools to absorb less than 1% of the VAT rate from profits. Internal documents have shown that the Treasury and indeed ministers knew parents would have to absorb 10% fee hikes, but did it anyway.
So we've been around the houses on this quite a few times,
yeah.
And I'll just start by making the straightforward point that the vast majority of people in our country send their children to state schools.
Yes.
That'll be the vast majority of your viewers. So whilst I understand the interest that the Telegraph and others might have in this topic, I do believe it was the right thing to do in order to invest more in state education. And
but
private schools
set parents to take the hit, 10% more, just make them pay more.
Look, private schools have whacked up their fees over the last 20 years, way, way, way beyond inflation. And that's where we are.
How many private school pupils have been forced out by your policy, do you know?
So we do keep track of the numbers. There's been some numbers reported in the last day or so from the Independent Schools Council, which we don't accept. We don't think are the numbers that we would recognise. The numbers of
We've got 25,000.
Yeah, we don't accept that. What we have seen is that more children are getting their first choice in a state school this year, and also the numbers in terms of movement that we've seen are in line with historical trends. We've actually seen more private schools opening in the last year than closing.
Well, how many have closed and how many have opened?
I think from the top of my head, it was around 60 have closed and around 70 have opened.
81 have closed and 70 have opened.
We could be talking about different time periods.
OK, but more schools appear to have closed than opened. I mean, is it a good policy to have a school closure at the end of it? I mean, surely that defies the logic of being Education Secretary. You want schools to open, you want schools to thrive, you don't want teachers to be made redundant. We've got 81 school closures.
I don't know what the time period is for that, because every year we see significant numbers of private schools closing and more opening. That's always been the case. That's consistent with what we've seen over many, many years. And that's because, you know, as you say, private schools are businesses. They're competing for places. They make an offer to parents. If parents don't choose to buy what they're selling, then, like any business, they make decisions.
Well, maybe they can't afford to buy what they're selling because VAT has been added to the fees.
Well, it's, you know, in a market economy, people can make choices about how they spend their money. If they choose not to buy a product or a service, then the business has to adjust their model. That's the way it works.
Why would you make a better deputy leader of the Labour Party than Lucy Powell?
So I'm standing because I want to unite the Labour Party to deliver change, but also I'll be a campaigning voice at the heart of government. I've got a strong track record of getting things done that Labour members appreciate. You know, expanding free school meals. Actually, VAT on private schools is rather popular with Labour Party members. And with the public as well, actually. It's very popular with the public. And alongside that, taking action on child poverty, and tackling child poverty is my number one priority during this campaign.
Are you committing to force the government into scrapping that two-child benefit cap? Because you have spoken about that in some of the interviews you've given. Yeah,
so I'm leading the work across government on this, and what I'm seeking from members is a mandate to do more on child poverty. The action I've just described on expanding free school meals will lift 100,000 children out of poverty next year. That is big, but there is a lot more that we need to do. I'm clear about what the evidence tells me. I know what I'll be pushing for, and what I'm asking members is for a mandate to be that voice at the cabinet table, pushing for change in the model of people like Angela Rayner and John Prescott, who were in government, running big departments, but also brought members' voices to the table and pushed for good Labour policies.
Final question. Can you win this thing?
Yes.
It's being announced in half term, so the last week of October. That's how I'm accounting for the dates this month. But can you win this thing? Because the members are on Lucy Powell's side, according to latest polling.
Yes, I think the most recent serious poll that we've got shows that it's all to play for, but also that captures Labour Party members. What it doesn't capture are our affiliated supporters and our big trade unions, and I'm really proud to have the backing of many of our biggest trade unions in this contest.
All right, well, good luck with that. Bridget Phillipson, thank you for coming into the studio and speaking to us once again on GB News. Great to see you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.